Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Berlinale Talents and to this session, Shock of the Real, History as Provocation. We feel very honored to have Raoul Peck here today. He has 2 films running at the Berlinale this year, so we're very happy that he found the time to be here at Talents today. Ben Gibson will be moderating this session, so please give a warm welcome to both of them.
Welcome to Talents, Raoul.
Thank you.
So, Courage Against All Odds is our theme this year. I'm hoping that Raoul Peck is going to help us come out with a toolkit today, because we're going to look a bit at his whole life and career and to think about memory, history, the rarity of real thinking, of hard thinking, of analysis in our culture, in our cinema, and there are lots of angles to come at. He's got 2 films in the Berlinale, and it looks like he's the busiest person in the entire world. And I know that he's a hard-working filmmaker, but actually it took a number of years. I mean, you've been working 10 years on the Baldwin film, and 6 or 7 years on
Well, 10 on the Marx as well.
Yeah, but it's great that those things come together because they're in completely different forms, and yet our theme of taking what were previously very unfashionable things in the realm of ideas come together in two different ways. I want to start, before I ask you anything, by showing a little clip. I don't know how many people in this room have seen I'm Not Your Negro. Yeah. Yeah, complaints. This is what we want, the complaints about it being sold out. You'd be grateful you're not in New York, where you just can't get in, even if you bribe somebody. Okay. So we're just going to show the first clip, which is, and in a way it doesn't betray completely the texture of the film, because the film has this extraordinary essayistic collage of different materials that we're going to talk about, but you're going to see something that comes in at the end of the film, which is an extraordinary one speech from Baldwin. Can we have the first clip? So, although a lot of people now are coming for the first time or just beginning to come to an understanding of the figure of Baldwin, somebody who's not accepting a liberal idea that what black Americans need to do is aspire to have some of the things that white Americans have, but actually the question of racism is a question of identity and of ownership and much deeper things. It's not new to you because it's part of Baldwin's work is part of your political DNA. Could you say how you started to think about Baldwin and how long he's been in your life?
Well, I was fortunate to discover Baldwin very early on in my life. I was probably around 17, 18, and I read one of the first book I read was The Fire Next Time. And it was an incredible explosion for me, because suddenly all the feelings I had, all the sort of doubt I had about what I was seeing, what I was reading, what I was experiencing, suddenly had a structure, had a name, has an analysis. And I started to put, the world around me in a sort of very deconstructive structure that enabled me to go through it up to today. It's, I've read, of course, Baldwin again and again, and it's not, Baldwin is not somebody you just read. He's really somebody you can study. Every sentence in that film is an incredible wealth of philosophy, of political sharpness and historical analysis. And, you could watch the film 3-4 times and find something else each time. So my confrontation with the rest of, whatever existed came through the eyes of Baldwin, basically.
And at a certain point, you went to the Baldwin estate, and you thought, well, what the hell? I'll write them a letter. and see whether I can get access to all of these extraordinary things that nobody else has had access to.
Yeah.
What did you say in the letter?
Well, that's one thing I always understood as a documentary filmmaker. With narrative, I do both, but with documentary filmmaking, you need to be very sincere in what you do. Otherwise, there is no way you can go all the way with your subject or your project. And I also learn about being patient. It happened many times that for one reason, one particular person that you need in your film say no to you. And of course you can't have that. So you go a first time, a second time, and you come back 3 months later, you come back 2 years later, whatever it takes. If that person is really important to your film, it's important to stick to that and go again and again, because what actually that person is telling you is that I still don't trust you to tell you my story. It's never that I don't want to tell my story, even when I think, in particular, people who have been traumatized, or people who have felt they went through something major in their life. Of course, they don't want to give it to the journalist that's just passed by and will probably don't know what to do with it. So the person needs to feel who you are. What is your foundation? What do you have in your belly? And sometimes it takes a long time. That's why I remember as a young filmmaker, it was a crime to go somewhere else with a camera and start filming. You were supposed to learn the people, and by the way, present yourself and be humbled. You don't come as a conqueror. You come as somebody who first try to understand, to watch, to listen. And now with the evolution of technology, we see more and more that people go in certain countries and just shoot and go. That's almost the normal format now that journalists, by the way, are using a lot. And I was fortunate to start cinema on another time where there were certain rules, certain human rules that you had to respect. To come back to Baldwin, I wrote a letter and I was very sincere in saying, I don't know what this film is going to be. I just know that Baldwin is important to me, that he needs to come back. His words and work is being to be forgotten. And I want to have access to, I don't know if it's going to be a narrative or a documentary or a mixed form, but I just want to have an option on his work. And, I met Gloria Carifa-Smart, who is James Baldwin's younger sister, and she said yes to everything. She gave me access to everything. But it's important to know, she already knew my work. Yeah. I was surprised that I got everything like this, but she has seen Lumumba in particular, yeah, and a lot of my other films, and somehow the amount of time you take to have the trust of somebody, she already had it, yeah, by the film I had made. And this say also something to the choices you make in your life for each and every film you make. You pay a price for every film. There is not such a thing as, I'm going to make this small film so that I can make the bigger one later. Each film that you produce or you make is part of you, People are going to look at them to know who you are. So there is nothing as an innocent film or as a small film, as I'm doing this for money, and later I will really do what I want to do. This is nothing, you are a virgin once, that's it. You can't do it again and again. So, and in this particular case, it's because I choose to make those films, that at some point I could have this incredible, unprecedented access to the whole body of work of James Baldwin.
But then at a certain point you made the decision that there was going to be all of James Baldwin's words, so you were making effectively an essay film spoken by James Baldwin. So in that sense you were absolutely in the form, not the conqueror, and you were going to build all kinds of elements into that.
Again, because I never did a choice in my life saying I want to do narrative films or I want to do documentary. I always decided whatever the material were leading me to. This is something I came to film because of politics. So it was always about the content. And of course the form, but the form is linked to the content. I came from a generation after what we know as the militant films, where it was just about the content. And they didn't care if the sound was very bad, the lighting was very bad, the editing was bumpy and jumpy. It was just, we need to be out there and have the slogan, heard. And, my generation was much more concerned with also the form. So going into that project, I was really open. In fact, I thought I would have to do a narrative and a documentary, as I did for Lumumba. And then at some point I tried to find a mixed form. I wasn't satisfied. And then one day I had this great opening that Gloria gave me those notes about a book called Remember This House that Baldwin wanted to write and never could write for many different reasons. And the book was about, three of his friends, Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X. All three were assassinated. And through their lives, and it was the first time I was having that connection, that triangle of those three leaders that were supposed to be, miles apart. But in fact, there was a strong connection between them. And that was the open door for me, because then I had a genuine, organic way to tell a story. And the story was this book, in fact, he wrote it, but it's all over his body of work. He just didn't know it or didn't have the time to put it together. And in the book, in the notes, he also said, this book will means that I have to go back south, meet the widows, meet the children who are no longer children, etc., etc. So you already have the narrative, about first what the effort that would be for him to go and write that book and the pain that it would mean. And so all these are like, it's exactly when you write a screenplay. You use all those elements in your story, and I just did it for a documentary. And so I had some sort of guidance, some dramatic guidance to put this together.
I mean, one thing that's very formally exciting to me is that this is a film with a massive impact, and it's going to have a massive impact. And it's in what is, not an everyday form, because you're interested in him as a cultural analyst. If he talks about John Wayne, you show John Wayne. In a way, it's an essay by an intellectual, and you and Baldwin are working together to create a tapestry of expressions about American culture. But did you know all those films? Did you go on that journey again with him? I mean, did it reflect your experience?
Well, again, for me, making a film is always linked to the question, how can I go further than just the content of the film and the form that exists, already in cinema. And it's always about, how creative you can be in linking content and form. And I never gave myself a limit, meaning that I use whatever will come in my hands, and I make sure that I find a creative way to use it. And I had very good professors, teachers that were incredible people in my artistic life. You know, people like here in Germany, Alexander Kluge, people like Chris Marker, people like Godard. Those were incredible, Arun Farouki. Those are incredible makers of form, inventors of form. All their films are pure experiment. And those, for me, are the researcher of filmmaking. And, you know, you might not like a whole film. You might not like the story, but there is always one scene or two, or even some sort of device where you only could say, wow, how did he do that? So what I learned from them is to have total freedom in what you make. But total freedom doesn't make that you ignore the norms or you ignore the constraints. You just have to use them in your creative process.
Because you could also be talking about Baldwin, we could also be talking about the whole process of saying, okay, we're going to make a film about the meeting of Marx and Engels and the conception of the moment of the Communist Manifesto and the moments that led up to 1848. How long ago were you thinking, okay, I'm interested in the young life of Marx and Engels?
Well, again, because I was fortunate enough to start on Marx very early on. I was 20, 21, and at a period that I was shaping my mind and my brain and my political training. And Marx also was very influential in who I am today. So I never thought really about, you know, making a film on that. First of all, I would never dare with all the, you know, the bias and the false history result of what is called Marxism and had nothing to do with Marx. That was a battle that you could not win. Until 10 years ago, I was approached by somebody at Arte who wanted to do a sort of mixed form documentary narrative on Marx. And of course, we agree very rapidly that it could only be the young Karl Marx. And I started working on that form, but was, again, never satisfied of what it could be. And one day I just decided it's going to be a narrative. And I changed the goal of the film, and I left Arte, and I had to develop my own production to do that. Of course, at the time it started like the impossible film to make. You know, how do you avoid to speak about Russia, to speak about Cambodia, to speak about all the monstrosities that those countries have put, you know, in the world. And so we really had to find a form and a time frame, and the time frame of the founding of all his ideas and how they develop, and basically the confrontation of three young people in the 19th century who are confronting repression, inequalities, famine in a Europe that was basically repressive, and how they decide to change the world, and in an incredible way. And that's the story I wanted to tell.
I mean, it's extraordinary also because in other people's hands, I mean, I was thinking that you and Pascal Bonnet are writing about ideas and giving them to flesh and blood characters, and they're talking about ideas, they're arguing, and I was trying to think of other filmmakers. I mean, maybe Ken Loach's film about the Spanish Civil War, the work of Costa Gavras and Pontecorvo, but there's only a few places where I can think of something where it's a dramatic scene and people are arguing about ideas. How did you work out what the structure was going to be, how much you were going to show us? I mean, of course, there's, you know, the potentially corny scene where they're saying Europe is haunted by a spectre, you know, which you expect in a historical movie, that you're going to see the moment of some idea, you think, oh, that's, potentially corny. Did you think about how you were going to avoid that and how you were going to bring life to it?
We had no choice, because if we had kept that sort of didactic approach, we would have been dead in the movie. So we knew it was a very hard challenge. There is a reason why it took 10 years, because 5 of those 10 years were just writing the screenplay, draft after draft. And one of the decisions we took after a few years researching and going through numbers of biographies is that we realized that most biographers have very little idea about characters, about what you need to make a film. So after a while, even, what's his name? Not Pasolini, who had a project on Marx. Remy. Okay, I'll
Somebody will answer this in the next half
yeah.
hour. Who's the other one?
We never could find the right response to that. And one day Pascal Bonitzer and I, who we wrote together, we decided to go back to the core. And the core are the correspondence, all the letters that those 3 young people wrote to each other. And in those letters, we were discovering incredible, passion, humor, irony, anger, and you really had a direct link to each one of these characters. And we decided to write the screenplay only through, or in majority, through those correspondence.
Well, it's a really beautiful film. And the moment when they meet in Ruger's room and try to be very rude to each other, in a way is also very classical. I mean, it's as though you're putting them in a kind of youth movie.
Yeah. Well, it's the other difficulty, that's also the story of my life with cinema, is how do you go? Because politically, I was not interested in doing my own movie where I'm totally free and I can say what I think, no matter, who understand it or not, who agree with me or not. I never believe in this notion of being an artist for being an artist. I come from Haiti. It's a poor country with a strong history. And I have a different view of that. Being an artist is a privilege. It's not a privilege you can just use for your individual needs, but you need to give back something to your society. So that being said, where do I go? I knew that whatever I do, I should try to reach the bigger audience possible. Meaning, where they are, it's in American movies, basically. We are formed by this dominant cinema worldwide. You can, till today, is the same. You can take any numbers, I think in Germany it's maybe 80% American movies, or in France, which is one of the countries who resist in Europe the most, who have more or less 45 to 50. But that's it. It's still, Hollywood is still the dominant cinema. And so how do you go there? How do you reach an audience which is formed by that cinema, who is expecting certain answers or certain way of doing things, certain way you use music and dramatic and et cetera, et cetera. So you have to use the form, break it, and put it in a form where it's both acceptable for you and for the audience, in order that you don't lose the audience, but that you still can bring him some sort of content. And I try never to compromise with the content, but I can play with the form. I can, I use the form even. And so that's the thing that always guided me. How do I get the widest possible, audience.
And it's amazing when you just said 5 minutes ago, I start with the ideas, and then cinema comes later from the point of view of your story. So can we quickly do that? So you're born in 1953 in Port-au-Prince. At 8, you moved to Kinshasa, and you're educated there, and in Brooklyn, and then in France. So you're already traveling the whole world before you're 10, 12. You studied industrial engineering and economics, which is probably when you were reading Capital, at the Humboldt University here in Berlin.
No, in TU, Technische Universität,
Okay.
Berlin. I don't know where some journalists find this Humboldt University.
I don't know. I'm some journalist.
No, but I've seen it many times before.
That's me.
Know, and, it sounds, East German, so he's leftist, so it must be Humboldt. And it's, they created, a fictional role peg, so.
That's exactly what I thought, yeah.
No, it was Technische Universität Berlin.
Yeah, but there's something very epic about your life story anyway, so we've got to have it, because there's the year where you're a New York taxi driver, which is...
Well, that's the other thing, too. Like, I read a report, German TV recently, they said, wow, incredible, he was a taxi driver for 4 years, and he became a filmmaker,
The next story, the next story will be that you met Paul Schrader one night and told him a story about how you'd like to kill everyone, and that's the reason.
Exactly. So, well, I have 2 parallel lives, so it's.
Yeah. All right, but then there's also a moment when you're a minister of culture, so you're holding high office in Haiti. How does this happen? And moving it another way.
Yes. Well, I have a very complicated, but for me it was a great way to grow up and to be confronted with different world, with different situation. And again, it's because the choice I made very early on were linked to politics. When I came to study in Berlin, it was in 1973, 74. There was a dictatorship in Haiti until 1986. Yeah. So I belonged to a generation who was supposed to go back and fight the dictatorship, underground with a false identity. And we knew that we shouldn't get, too deep into wherever we were, in Paris or Brussels or Berlin. So no children, no, marrying, but because we were supposed to go back. And the generation before me, I knew some of them, and they all went back and got killed. So it was really serious business. And so cinema was in that sense as well. So, and I learned through that to always be, awake and whatever was around me and use it. And when I came to France, I became something else. When I went to New York, I just had to, to find a way. After my diploma, I went back to New York because I think the person I was living with had a job in New York, and I looked for a job, and taxi driver
was there. Yeah, okay.
Was the easiest thing. You didn't need to pass a hard exam, and you could leave any day. So I worked for 8 months as a taxi driver.
Well, there it is. It's in your biography. You've done it. But
and by the way, writing a screenplay. I remember going to JFK Airport early in the morning so to have one, drive where you make half of the money of the day, so you could spend 2-3 hours at the airport parking and write. So that's what I did, and it took me, those 8 months to decide that I was going to come back to Berlin and pass the exam for the academy. So it was a very important moment.
So then you were at the DFFB, and when we've screened recently the film that you sort of broke out into the world with, L'Homme sur le quai, we also screened a DFFB short, which is called something like The Minister of the Interior is on Our Side. I think that's the title.
Yeah, wasn't it
anyway, it's a very good, ironic...
is our friend, something like that. The Minister of Interior is our friend. It was like a old lady who would say that while we were filming, and we kept it in the film.
But then there's a real sense of the impact of as you say, Kluger's work, and because there's a sort of, it's a montage, and you're undermining the official version. And in a way, I mean, one of the things that I'm thinking about in the pack of things that people take away from today is how they learn to understand counter-information and to look at the official message and somehow deal with that. But you chose to go from economics and engineering, and cinema was going to be a vehicle. What was around you then that in a bigger space that made you think, okay, cinema is going to make some big political impact?
Well, you know, it's not so much, you know, it's the circumstances, you know, the circumstances of my private life, the circumstances of the life in my country, but also the circumstances in Berlin. Berlin at the time was a little island where the whole world was there. You had access culturally to everything. It was a very condensed political bomb. You know, our friends were, you know, the people from SWAPO, the ANC people, the people from Nicaragua, El Salvador, all those movements were, you know, the Iranian communists, you know, who all got killed after they come back to Khomeini. That was a generation you know, who was on the streets almost every day, who were studying Marx, who were doing some sort of other project. It was a real collective, and for me, that's what the world was. You know, there was an incredible international solidarity, and by the way, I saw this solidarity, you know, going away over the years. You know that. Not only because there was a stronger repression, people who were slightly older than me, they end up in the terrorist groups, and others went elsewhere, and a lot of the ones I knew went either into the SPD for the worst ones, and and
others was going to be the RAF the worst ones, but the SPD are the worst ones.
And others went to the Green Party, you know. But what happened is that the rest of the world started to fade away, you know. And I remember coming back here once, and you know, it was about finding some sort of support for Haiti, and a lot of these friends were elsewhere. You know, it was about European election. It was about getting into parliament here. It was about, you know, building their party. And that was the beginning of this globalization, but that was also a return to your immediate interest, you know.
And also post-colonialism was so much more complicated than, I mean, you know, yes, you know, there was the Allende, the fall of Allende, and those things happening in Central America that focused a lot of minds. But then,
well, the front were more were clearer.
Yeah.
You know, you had to choose, and today it's just a sort of mishmash, where, you know, capitalists have won. There is no wall, and everything goes. You know. That's okay.
Somebody has a phone
we
call.
will wait.
Thank you for that call.
So we live in a time of confusion, of you know, of ignorance, where you don't need to know anything to become a president, where there is no ideology, there is no history. History is past. And I don't know how you young people do, because it's very confusing. You know, I had some sort of guidance. I have elders. I had people to turn to. My teachers were on the street with me. Yeah. There was a conversation in class. You know, the world was there, here with us. And today, you know, with this bombardment of pseudo information, of pseudo news, and the amount of screen you have in your life every day. Where do you find the concentration? Where do you find the space, to see the bigger picture? Because they kept you focused on the next tweet, the trending, the next product, the next iPhone, it takes all your energy. You are the perfect consumer. This is what capital wanted. You are there now.
That's very depressing, yeah.
I see you stealing more and more.
Yeah, I'm going like this. No, I'm actually quite optimistic. And because, it's interesting, because counter-information also became, there's these people in the Republican Party who watch Michael Moore films and try and work out how they could look like radicals while they are being the official message and all of that. So we're getting to a point where, unless you do have some training as a Marxist and you do think about what contradictions are and what lies are, then you are much more stuck. So let's just go quickly back to this narrative, because I'm heading for the next clip. So Patrice Lumumba, well, you came to the attention of the world really with L'Homme sur le quai, which went to Cannes, which is an incredibly beautiful and very dark film in a way about these post-colonial memories of Haiti and about those streets. Which didn't look like a film in a way that was made for reasons of content. It felt like a terribly emotional and a very personal film. And then within that, this Haitian corner, and then presumably when you made the documentary about Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of the DRC, not many people knew who the hell that was, right, in Europe.
But again, that's maybe interesting for you to learn the story of that movie, because in fact I had made, the documentary was before Men by the Shore. I had made my first film, Haitian Corner, which was a low budget. We shot in Brooklyn, at the time I think for $200,000, which was nothing but a lot of money. And the film was selected to the forum. And during the forum, a German producer and a Swiss producer approached me. And me being a black man, they said, we have a project about Africa. I say, wow, it's a big continent,
It's perfect for you.
And it's about, and again, I come from Haiti, and in Haiti we use whatever comes in our hands and we make something else out of it. So I said, okay, can I read something? He said, yeah, we'll send you a treatment. So I got the treatment, and I saw it's the story of a Swiss doctor who goes to an unnamed African country, who of course met a black girl, and he is the savior of many, many people. And at the end of the film, something catastrophic arrives, and then he goes back to Switzerland.
It's perfect for you.
So I'm making it a caricature a bit. It was not that bad, but it was in the mold of what the Western world was doing about, the African continent and the third world in general. That was the only possible approach and the excuse was, people don't want to see a film about black characters or Arab characters or Chinese characters. You need a main character that is Western, and so they can have empathy. That was told to you like this, at the time it was not in the disguise. And so, but because those two producers were nice guys, I really told them, said, listen, I don't want to do this, but we can talk and let's see what we can come up with. So we start with the screenwriter they had, and we tried to exchange ideas, and I start to say, I can only speak about things that I know. First of all, I need to know a very definite country. So I knew Congo. I went to school in Congo. So let's, choose Congo. At least I know what I'm talking about. And the second thing, I'm interested in politics. Let's try to see what kind of stories. And so we start researching again. But still then, the name Lumumba came because I knew Lumumba the story as a kid. And so I thought, yes, maybe that can be as interesting. He was killed by the CIA. That can be a sort of thriller. But it took us a lot of drive, before I could actually have the guts to say, I want to make a film where Lumumba is the main character. We went through, to tell you an example, like, so the doctor died, but his best friend was a black doctor. So his sister is coming from Switzerland to pick up the body of the brother. And she fell in love with the black daughter. So now, problem. So we went through different, at one point, the white doctor was Lumumba's best friend. And they were, when Lumumba was fleeing, he was with him and almost got killed. But at the end, by the way, he always go back to Switzerland. So and that tells you how much yourself can be alienated, because I thought about it, how come I couldn't bring up, let's talk about Lumumba himself directly. And it took me time not only to have the guts, but also to understand why it was like this, because the image that I had of Lumumba was of this black, crazy African politician, of course corrupt, and that was basically a puppet of Moscow. And when you try to think why is that, you find out that most journalists had that particular idea of him. And all I was reading was those white journalists who started their career during the Congo crisis, whether they were American, French, Belgium. And if you read a newspaper like Le Monde in the 60s, the reports were very racist, without knowing them. And Le Monde was considered leftist.
And very snobbish, because he was a beer salesman who worked in the post office. He wasn't a
of
member
course.
of a leading family or...
And by the way, I met a lot of those journalists because I did my research. And of course, each one of them was saying, I was the one who taught him how to write articles. I would correct his article. And so Lumumba had a lot of father and teachers. And so it's about, how do you make sure that you are truthful to yourself? If you are going in making films where you don't know if it's going to take 6 months or 10 years of your life, you better make sure that, you have the sitting meat to sit down and work, the discipline, and also that ultimately this is going to be an important project for you. So, and I learned not to make compromise on that, and that's how I think I survive in this industry.
So this is clip number 3, not number 2. And I think it's an extraordinary thing when you're making films about how history touches real people and they're believable as people and historical forces, and you get those things in one place and we don't feel like we're watching either a propaganda film or something that's trivial. You take them all to the moment when they're in Brussels and their handover of power is happening and everyone's talking about how to arrange it, and we see people who are the agents of post-colonial moment and the others trying to deal with them. So can we have number 3, please? Yeah, it's a wonderful sequence. 'Cause while you were talking just now, I was thinking about how actually I used to be the distributor of Battle of Algiers and most of the Costa Gavras movies in the UK. And when Roland Joffe and David Putnam were making The Killing Fields, which is all about, you know, how you have a white friend and therefore the white friend is the star, that they would ask me endlessly to rent these films while they were preparing this thing. And eventually I saw the film and I said to David Putnam, you know, you can pile up as many strategic socialist films as you like, but understanding that what looking at them is like won't make you make a socialist film. It'll just be a lot of liberal films. And in a way, there's so much analysis in that, because so much of what happened in colonialism is caught up in the sequence, but we somehow believe in those people. I want to ask you about the influence of other filmmakers on the way you make fiction, and what kind of, because it's a very sophisticated piece of dramatic construction.
Well, it's, you know, there are several levels and several moments in the creative process. And again, I had as a principle that I will use anything that works in any kind of movie. You know, for me, I watch movies, I watch everything, every kind of movie. I even say sometimes as a joke, you know, I watch at 3 o'clock in the morning some sort of hunting and fishing documentary, you know, because, you know, there is life there too, you know, and so that's the way I use American cinema as well. There are very powerful tools. The thing that you need to know is how not to indulge in the, I would say, the ideology of those tools. How do you make sure that you deconstruct them in order to use them? So, and again, I have no particular recipe about that. Is, you know, you try to follow the story, you research a lot. I make film, my narrative are really full of reality. I never did a film without on a subject that was totally fictive. Mm-hmm. It's always about the reality, because I think the reality can be so absurd, so complex, so incredible, that's what, you know, moved me in the cinema I do. And the same thing in my documentaries, I try to bring as much narrative as possible to make sure that I'm not just doing a didactic piece, but that I am telling a story, meaning that it can always be seen as a story, not only on a political context or today, but 50 years from now, you watch it, it's a story. So that means you will, again, go inside of that story.
But there are different stages as well in your formation, because the experience of being in Berlin and the DFFB and some of the people that we talked about, and then you go to France and you're in the milieu of French filmmaking for a while when this is around when this is happening.
Yeah. But even before that, you know, in the DFFB at the time, things were not uniform. You know, we had fraction. There was the new, you know, those guys were the how do you call that? They were the one who knew, you know, they were into the beginning of video productions, of music videos and all that. They were the guys who had the girls, and then there were the political fraction, which was more me, but there were not many of us, and we had to find our own voice, but we were already in a world, or in a world of cinema here in Berlin, where we were losing terrain. We were losing the momentum, because TV was becoming more and more important. When I started going to work at SFB, by example, was being a traitor. You know, you go to TV, you are a traitor. And by the end of my study, you know, a lot of
Everyone was asking you the address
yeah,
of it.
of course. Everybody wanted to go to TV because that's where the jobs were. So I don't think my films, when I was studying, I don't remember that my films were the one that were chosen to be sent to festivals, you know. And I also remember that I had a sense of urgency that not many of my colleagues had. You know, they were enjoying the Berlin, you know, atmosphere of the slow life, the gardens, the bars. And not that I didn't go to bars, I had fun, but you know when.
But you were a fighter in a post-colonial battle in exile as well.
Yeah, and I know I had to come back. I know, you know, Berlin was not my life, and so it was like, let me get everything I can during that short moment of time. You know, I had the time to do how do you call that? An exam to be a projectionist, because then I had the freedom to take, you know, all Tarkovsky on the weekend. You know, the Deutsche Kinemathek was on the second floor, so I could go and take all Sarkozy or all Godard and have projection, you know, with 5, 6 of friends, and we would watch all those films. You know, the library of the school, you know, which was also for the Kinemathek.
Same library.
You know, I felt like I read everything because it was about getting your hands on everything you can. And so it was not common for everybody to do that because we didn't have the same amount of time. We were not living in the same, you know, leap of time. And 2 other people who were very important in my life at the time were 2 of my most important teachers were Krzysztof Kieslowski and Agnieszka Holland, that you had a few days ago. And those 2, you know, it was a time
You said earlier that Agnieszka was saying to everybody what she said to you.
Yes, well...
What were the important things?
And that's funny because I read a report about what she did here, and one of the sentences is something she used to tell about, you know, because one day we had to write a scene, and it had to be, you know, each of us had the same numbers of actors, and we had the same dialogue, but we had to use that dialogue in different scenes. And we had one day to do it, and the next day we would have to direct the scene in front of everybody. And a lot of the German, young German future directors, you know, it was like, you know, we don't have stories here, you know, it's like, it's impossible, we don't find, and Agnieszka was telling them, you know, this morning I took the subway, I saw 10 different stories. You know, it's because you don't look, you don't watch, you don't see what's around you. You are sleeping, you know. And I heard her saying something similar about Europe today, that we have been, you know, sleeping those last 20, 30 years, and not seeing the drama around us, not seeing the characters around us.
I want to show a very short clip. We're going out of order because I just wanted to talk about being responsible for counter-information and keeping information flowing. It's a little clip which is from Assistance Mortelle, which is a film that you made about the earthquake in Haiti. You've made a number of films there, but here you ended up having the responsibility for telling everybody what was really happening behind this huge aid thing. But let's look at the clip first. Can we have number 4? So it strikes me that these stories take a long time to come out, and they keep coming out, and then they don't quite get there. I mean, the whole thing about the Bill Clinton foundation and how it wasn't really fashionable. They needed a health center. They couldn't clear rubble, and all of that. Is that still? I mean, Haiti is an extraordinary story in terms of its tragedies being compounded by misunderstanding and all of that.
Well, in fact, that's another story where, I didn't go to make this documentary. This documentary just happened at the time, after the earthquake. I went back to Haiti. I was a civil servant, so I went back to help. I didn't go back with a camera. It was about, really help, and I put myself at the disposal of the government. But within, a week, I could see what was happening, and that nobody had control over that it was about making money for a lot of people. We had private airplanes coming every day and trying to make deals. And I realized that, whatever I could do, and some of my friends as well, had no meanings. And I had to come back to something I knew I can do, is a film. So I took the decision, again, to always use all the elements you have in your hand. And one in particular important asset that I had was access. I knew, because of my past, because of my people knew me in Haiti, I knew that I could film all that from the inside. So I decided to observe everything that would happen within the next 2 years. So I got the official permission from the president, from the prime minister, and then the UN had to give me permission. All the NGOs had to give me permission, the banks, including Bill Clinton. So basically, I had 2 set of team all the time, filming meetings, and of course, after a few months, they forget, we were part of everybody, and they forget that we were filming. So we had incredible footage that people never know. And the film was about, how do you make the ultimate film about humanitarian aid and development policy, and to really show the disaster that it had become. Because I grew up in a development family. My father went to Congo to work for the UN. So all my life we had UN experts who were a part of projects that my father did around the world or in Africa. So and I knew it's not working. I knew quite well that it became a business, and so the film was about how to show that and make Haiti the last example in that sort of catastrophe.
But it's the only time I've ever seen a film which really lays out systematically how foreign aid is investment in the wrong things in a future economy, rather, so much of the time. I want to quickly go back. I'm going to open it out very soon, and I'm sure that people want to talk about Baldwin and Marx and so on as well. But I just want to show this clip because I think it's partly because we're quite into mad politicians at this moment in history as well. But I want you to introduce Moloch Tropical, which is rather an extraordinary film about an elected leader who is not very stable. Let's put it that way. Could you say a bit more about what the dramatic setting is?
Well, the story is about a leader, very popular and populist leader who got elected and got a lot of power and felt that he was like a prophet and that he had no more limits. And the background of that film, it's partly based on former President Aristide in Haiti, but it was also a time where I was seeing around in Europe and elsewhere the abuse of power. One particular example is Berlusconi. Another one is Bill Clinton with Monica Lewinsky. All these background stories within the cell of power and were happening. And Putin in Russia, You know, we were beginning to have leaders that obviously are very authoritarian leaders or abusing of power that were elected. You know, that's a new, sort of leaders that is coming up those last 30 years, and we're going to see more of them. So but in Haiti, that came to a point where there is no way I could approach the story in a serious way. It means in a dramatic way only. And I decided to make a total satire of this story. And one final episode was, I think, that helped me understood what kind of film I needed to make is, some of you might remember when George W. Bush went to, I think he went to, it wasn't Iran, it was, well, it was after the Gulf War. In any case, he was making a press conference, and at one point there was one, maybe Iranian, I don't forget, that took his, Iraq, that was in Iraq, he took his shoe and threw it at Bush. And that split of a second where Bush did that, it was incredible. It's like suddenly the king was naked. You know, it was this huge, military, nation invasion, and he had to duck for a shoe. And his eyes at the very moment was incredible. And so that's the feeling I had making that film.
Okay, let's have the next clip then, please. The thing is, the reality is even worse, because in this, there's a happy ending to this, because they just get rid of him and bundle him into a plane and get rid of him. So, I want to open it out. We can talk about that clip, but I'm sure that there are people who want to talk about other films. But before that happens, I just want to say, for the audience's benefit, because we were talking just before this, that actually the film that you've seen about James Baldwin, to me, is an extraordinary and wonderful thing, that it's the highest screen average in New York. There are queues around every block. It's having an incredible kind of cultural impact. And I don't know how many cities Remy said it was playing in, but 250 cities.
So we start with 40 the first week, the second week 150, and we just learned today the next week it's going to be 250 cities in the United States. Yeah.
So, yeah. There, yeah. Are there any microphones moving around? Yes, here we go. Oh, it's that throw your mic thing, yeah.
Okay. Yes, I think it's wonderful to have a director that is so provocative in his way of doing politics and being, you know, Oliver Stone lost that touch a long time ago. Costa Gavras grew old.
Don't give me problem with Oliver, you know.
No, but I find, three questions very quickly. The first one is, you spent your career denouncing colonialism. We just saw it in the clip again, and that wonderful scene in Lumumba where he makes a speech denouncing the beatings and the dogs. Do you smile when you see Emmanuel Macron, for example, yesterday saying colonialism was a crime against humanity and the uproar it's creating in France right now? And the second question is, do you have a plan for a movie on the Duvalier? Is that something that's tempting for you? And was the idea with James Baldwin in the last couple of years also fueled how much of the Black Lives Matter movements in the United States played a role perhaps in perfecting or tuning up the movie on Baldwin?
Well, the first one is very easy to respond. I ceased very long ago to follow French politicians and what they are saying. They are totally out of touch and out of the reality. And they don't see that. And I say that with great pain because I'm not a cynical. I'm not somebody who say that politicians are not necessary. We need representative. We need politics. But there is another way to make politics. And it's very painful to see, you know, socialists or so-called socialists in that state. So the second question was about Haiti. You know, I've go back and forth depending on what I can do, and I have a project on the Haitian Revolution as well. But I did a film that stayed the only film today that, you know, A Man by the Shore. It was about the dictatorship of Duvalier. And don't forget the same thing, you know, I am allowed to make film that are mine, that are my narrative, but I had to make sure that also that the film has meaning for the other audience as well. That's the condition. And you know, it's part of what I do and what we do as filmmakers, and it doesn't diminish the project itself, but I do have to make sure that my film is universal before being a Haitian film or what else. And concerning the Baldwin film, and you know, I started this, you know, I'm Not Your Negro 10 years ago. And I started for one reason. It was because I felt Baldwin's voice was necessary in today's confusion. That younger people did not have any repair. I don't know. You know, you know, everything is on the same level. There is no importance and less important to the totally insane idea that there is something called fake news or, you know, everybody have opinions. That means you don't even have to prove what you're saying. You can say it without bringing the numbers that goes with it. So Baldwin was, you know, for me, somebody important that framed me, that helped me become the person I am. And I thought, you know, it's about time to bring him back and eventually help this current generation to get the necessary tools to make their own analysis. So when those images of those black men, girls, and boys being killed, it was just a further justification for the film, but it was not the starting point. It was just seeing how accurate Baldwin analysis was. You know, everything which is in the film are words and sentences he wrote 40, 50 years ago. And we feel that he sat down the very morning and wrote them down. And that's what makes the film totally somehow incredible, because it's like, you know, it's about today, and it is about today. Otherwise, I would not have made it. I don't make film for the past. I make film for the future and for now.
Thank you. Yeah. You have to throw it to this lady here in the third row. Can you throw it? Excellent.
Wow, it works. Yeah, thank you very much for these fascinating insights. I work in development cooperation in health in Kenya currently. And when I told some colleagues that I'm coming here this afternoon, everyone said, oh, did you see fatal assistance, the assistance mortelle, right? And people really talk about it. They see themselves in some of the characters depicted there. And of course, they also discuss a very critical approach. Well, I would just like to ask, of course, I do not share a totally pessimistic view because child mortality, for example, has gone down worldwide. I think there is still some things that have gone, well, not only things that are going bad, but a lot of things are going very
Well, with
bad.
all the money spent, that's the least we can ask.
Yeah, you are right. But my question is, did you have a chance or are you interested? Did you follow up? Did you get reactions from the community, from NGOs, United Nations, governments, and did that start a dialogue?
Yes, yes, she's asking about this film, Fatal Assistant, we talk about, which of course was devastating for the whole community of NGOs, of international organizations. And in fact, in Haiti, I did a Creole version, and all TV stations in Haiti decided to air the film the same day in the whole republic with a discussion after. So everybody was mad at me in the international community because it made their work difficult, because every peasant in the background knew about the story, and they were really, they knew what it was about because they have been, seeing all those organizations. I don't put all organizations in the same bag. There are very intelligent way to do that, and some of those organizations are working very well. But in terms of this whole structure, it is a catastrophe. Yes, there are progress, but I cannot, if I'm talking about my own country or a country like Congo, yes, the numbers have gone down, but how long do we have to wait? Because it's total injustice. You can say, well, now 30% of women are not dying at birth, but what about the 70% are still dying at birth? So that's the only way humanly I can see it. So there is no excuse. So the last thing is that a lot of organizations, the ambassadors, by example, I know they were pissed off, but they couldn't face me because they knew that I could have been more devastating with the film because they knew what I filmed. And if I wanted to destroy them, I would have. But my intent was to bring a discussion, a real discussion. So nobody dared attack me openly. And by the way, a lot of the people who works on the lower level, they came to me and say, thank you for the film. I'm talking about European people, American workers, because they are fighting themselves with their bosses. Because the project is taught in Berlin or in Washington or elsewhere, and they have to go through, even though when it's absurd, because all the decisions are already taken. So, and the last thing, yes, all the institutions, the World Bank, have been using the film for its practice. I know Brood voor die Welt, who was one of the founders. In fact, there was an evangelical association who gave me money for the film, but by the time I finished the film, they were included in the bigger organization of Brood voor die Welt. So there was a big discussion within the leadership to know, are they going to publicly support the film or not? Because they realized the film was very critical. And fortunately, they decided that they will support the film. And the film opened here in Berlin. So, and they invite me a few weeks later to have a discussion with the whole staff. And it was extraordinary because at the beginning, the people on the panel with me were kind of defensive. They were saying, no, 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 no. Yes, it was chaos at the beginning, but afterwards we start, to do it better, etc. But by the end of the meeting, that same man who was defending his work in Haiti was telling to the whole group, well, you are right, because there was an inundation in the south of Germany, and that was chaos, because we still don't know how to deal with that. Basically, when there is a catastrophe somewhere, everybody wants to help, but they don't use the people who are there. And that happened for Katrina, that happened with all those catastrophes. And you are dealing with people who are already traumatized because they lost their home, they lost their family sometimes. And you take over. You basically know better than them what to be done. And it's a bad way to deal with those moments. And we're going to have more and more of those catastrophes. If you see where the ecological impact and climate change is going. Our cities are built the wrong way, the bad locations, and it's going to be more and more flood and more earthquake, etc. And we are not always ready for that.
Thank you. Somebody there in the middle, near the back. Can you throw? There we go.
Okay, thanks. Your film on Karl Marx, young Marx, ends up with the young Marx and Engels winning their ideological battle and transforming the League of the Just into the League, the Communist Party,
League.
Communist League, and then the banner goes up: "Workers of all countries unite." It's very well done, very dramatically well done. At the same time, I just want to raise a conflict, because in terms of I've read about the reception, for example, for your James Baldwin film in America, and it's taken up, the themes are used and so on. It's praised from the standpoint of those, including people in black matter and so on, who have a very negative attitude towards the working class as a progressive force, or who write off the working class as a progressive force, who say that the working class, for example, is responsible for Trump. And there's this conflict between those who maintain that the progressive force inside society is the working class, and there are also there's this conflict with those who adopt a position of black nationalism and say our enemy is basically the working class. And I wanted to...
You see how confusing it is?
Yeah, it's confusing.
It is, all you are saying, it is exactly what is happening, confusion. Nobody said that it was simple. And some people are wrong in their analysis. But my job is to give you the tools to make your analysis, but I can't give you the result of it, And yes, there are people in Black Lives Matter who resent a Trump election, but that doesn't mean they are right. Maybe their analysis is too short. So it's our job to explain that among Trump voters, not all of them are the Ku Klux Klan. Not all of them are racist. Those are workers that have been deceived by their organizations, that have no clue about where to go to change their life. They are the victims as well. And capitalists know exactly how to put us against each other. And it demands a lot of reflection and sitting down and talking to each other in order to see, how do we get out of that. But the confusion, it's really the tool they use as well, And there are contradictions, and that doesn't mean that it cannot be changed. So, and my films are not at all didactic. In the Marx, if you watch it properly, you will see that even in those discussions among them, you could see the pre-danger of what will happen in Russia later on. You know, that's the idea of this film, was always also to not to be didactic, but also to show the complexity of the elaboration of a thought and of a doctrine. And Marx himself and Engels themselves, they were always critical of everything, including themselves. And this is something that we have lost along the way. And a last sentence about that, you know, people forget that Marx really defend the fact that the collective emancipation will always go through the individual collective emancipation. Those were not contradictory moments, but once the revolution happened in Russia, where it was not supposed to happen, Marx basically, for him, Russia was a third world country. There is no way this country could afford a revolution. He thought it would be Germany, France, or the UK.
Thanks. I think we've only got time for one more question. If somebody's got a very short,
maybe a young
short
person,
and sweet
this
one.
young lady, please.
This young lady here.
I want to hear the next generation.
Yes.
Hi. First, let me tell you how honored I am right now. My father and I are massive fans of yours. Grew up with your films. And I'm also an admirer of Baldwin's. Unfortunately, I still didn't get a chance to see the films due to obvious reasons. And I wanted to ask you how, I imagine that making a film like this, there must be a wish of showing everything of his work, what he's done, what he said. And I wanted to know, how did you manage to make the choice on what to show?
Well, that's something you as filmmaker will always have to do. You know, you are the directors or you are the screenwriters. You always need to know how to make those choices, but there is no recipe. It's a lot of intuition. It's a lot of trying. You know, I like the German expression, probieren geht über studieren, which it means, you know, you need to do it instead of, you know, staying in theory. You know, you need to try it out. You know, that's one thing. When you are editing, you know, you edit a draft and then you look at it, but you look at it in a critical eye. You know, there is this expression also, kill your babies. You know, in the Baldwin film, I had some extraordinary sequences that I really hang on them. They were great. But if they don't help the bigger story, you need to cut them. So, and it is also, you know, when you see a finished film, you know, the tendency, journalists in particular, and sometimes you might also do that, you see it as if the filmmaker have thought of this film as it is. You would wonder when and how you start and how the film was looking like at the beginning. So you have to include the process of it. The process is not, you know, you are discovering stuff as you go. You are seeing what works and what doesn't work. And you doing it in stages, you know. I like the analogy is like, you know, if you are at the bottom of a mountain and you know you have to go up there, you know, if you keep, you know, looking at that mountain, you will never go there because it's impossible. But if you say, you know, let me see where can I find a first little path, you know, just the first step. And then you find that path and you go and you arrive to a little ledge. And from there already, it looks different. And suddenly you see that little window that you didn't see on the bottom that allows you to go further up. And that's the process. You know, you cannot know where it will lead you. You just have to make sure that you're always going up and not going to the ground. But other than that, it's, you know, you have to trust yourself and then also people around you. You show your work, you exchange, you know, make sure that you have people you trust that can give you good advice. You know, none of us are genius. You know, there is one genius every two centuries, you know, but that's it. Marx was a genius. You know, all of us, everybody else is just hard work, okay?
Thank you, that's a fantastic reply. So I just want to say two things. One is a shameless plug, which is just to say that from 24th of March for that weekend, there's a colloquium, which is part of the celebration of 50 years of the DFFB, of your alma mater, which is called The Shock of the Real, where with international filmmakers coming in, and there's also a retrospective around that in the Arsenal. So one of the reasons that we have this title, The Shock of the Real, is because we're introducing our alumnus and talking about that subject then. That's a shameless plug. The other thing I want to say is I'm really looking forward to the first, like, fairly middle to right-wing American reviews of The Young Marks for the theatrical release, because although it's a great thing to get James Baldwin or the sort of somebody who's a fierce, clear thinker of the black intelligentsia into the American consciousness, the amount of work they've done to marginalize Marx is a huge mountain of activities.
Well,
so it'd be good to
it's
see
already started. A few, I think they can't handle it because it's, you know, a country where Obama is a fierce socialist, you know, you can imagine. So it's, and they are not capable of accepting that this is something they don't know. So it's going to be tough. But
It's great how you remind them about Bob Dylan, because that
Yeah.
sends them on the way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Raoul, thank you very, very much.
Thank
It was
you.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.